Hey guys, it's Kayla. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've watched some of my videos before. Today we're going to be doing another tag video. This is the Brandon Sanderson tag. It was created by Christy from Dostoevsky in Space. Dostoevsky in Space. I have never said that name out loud. I said it in my head. I was like, I got this. It was like the moment my mouth started to form the words, it just didn't know what to do. Like, it couldn't catch up with my brain, and then my tongue tripped on my teeth, and then you heard what I got. So that's I'm not gonna say it again. Dostoevsky in Space.
Done it again! Put Hollywood on the highlight reel. I'm just gonna say, wow.
I just couldn't think about it. I had to sneak up on it. Anyway, it is early morning. We woke up.
Early morning. She wakes up.
Went and got a large coffee. Everybody in my house is asleep still, and I decided, what the heck, let's get a jump on the day and start filming a video before somebody interrupts me. So that's what we're gonna do right now. And this tag, maybe not the best early morning tag because it requires me to really think about the books I'm going to talk about, but either way, let's go ahead and hop into it and see if I can formulate a coherent sentence. The first question is, Brandon wrote many early novels while working as a night clerk at a Provo hotel. What book kept you reading late into the night? So the most recent book that kept me up reading was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book caught me way off guard. I did not expect to love it so much, and the way that it's told, it has a very old Hollywood vibe, and also there's a lot of drama and gossip going around about Evelyn Hugo and her life, and obviously she's been married 7 times, so there's a lot of things that go into what happened and how she ended up with 7 husbands, and it's just a very compelling book. It might seem like it would be a more shallow story. It is so complex. It was wonderful. I laughed, I cried. I just wanted to spend the rest of my life with Evelyn Hugo listening to her talk about her life. This is my book club's pick for June, and everybody that talked to me about it raved about it. There was no differing opinions at all. It was just a 100%. Everyone was like, this book is so good. And toward the end of it, as you start to go through the husbands and you start to learn more and more, and you know, like, the direction that the story's going, and you're trying to figure out the connections between some things, you just can't put it down, especially as, you know what I mean, toward the end of a story, everything starts to come together, and that's how this book was. It was just super easy to read, and also super interesting, and, like, the content is, like, juicy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, celebrity gossip, old Hollywood, like, you want to know about it because it's something that's so different from your own lifestyle, but at the same time, like, her life is pretty tragic, and the things that she has to overcome as a woman, as a Cuban American, just the things that she does to get herself on top, to get her out of poverty from childhood in a family that basically didn't want her. She has no mom, her dad is a terrible person, and she does everything that she can to rise to the top, and she does, but obviously there's going to be a cost, so highly recommend that book. Question number 2 is, Brandon's complex magic system set his fantasy apart. What subject do you love to read about in all of its complexity? So this one I had to really think about because Christy's answer was so intelligent, and I was like, what am I gonna say? Like, what specific thing do I like to read about? And honestly, I love to read about World War II. This is a weird passion of mine, and I don't know why I'm so drawn to it. I think mostly because it's so crazy to think that a country like Germany was able to essentially take over all of Europe, and was able to do that through lots of different political, like, reasonings, and just all the things that led up to that point, and then obviously the horrible things that ensued from it that were just allowed to happen. And it's really intriguing to me, and I don't know why. I just love to read about it, even though it makes me cry, it makes me feel horrible. It's just something that I reach for, I'm drawn to. One of my favorite World War II books is We Were the Lucky Ones by Georgia Hunter. It's right here. I read this a couple years ago, and this book is written, this is a true story, And Georgia Hunter is the descendant of the Jewish family that survives World War II. And this book's, the fact that it's called We Were the Lucky Ones, but the family has so much tragedy befall it, but they still, like, in the end are lucky. It's beautifully written. It's kind of different. Like, it's like quite a few different perspectives, like, because the family gets kind of split up and you have to learn about what's going on with each different person. But there's things in this that I didn't realize. Like, one of the characters ends up I think in South America, but there's like the area that it gives you more of a perspective of what's going on in the entire world, or more parts of the world, I guess, not the entire world. But usually when you read a World War II book, most of them take place in Poland, but generally somewhere in Europe is the main focal point, and one of these characters ends up in South America. You get to see a view of the war from that point of view, and it's really fantastic. And if you are into World War II books, or if you're into books that make you cry, right here. So good. Question number 3 is, Brandon gets book ideas from watching other storytellers fail to execute a concept well, and then he figures out how to do it better. What 2 books handle the same concept in strikingly different ways, and which do you prefer? So this one is kind of, I don't know, maybe these aren't a fair comparison, but I read Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi last year, I believe. Maybe it was in February of this year. I don't remember, but either way, I read it pretty recently, and then I also read The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. Both of these books, and both authors discuss this, are a pretty strong allegory for, like, the Black experience and the history of the world and in America, and I think both authors had made valiant efforts into trying to create a fantasy world and show, like, things from the real world in a fantasy element. Because for some reason people can get all up in arms about how somebody's treated in a fantasy book, but then, like, as soon as it's happening in the real world, all of a sudden it's just like, well, I don't care. But that's a whole nother topic. But Tomi Adeyemi's book obviously is written for young adults, and so it's kind of not fair to compare it to N.K. Jemisin, but at the same time they're tackling very similar subjects. And for me, Children of Blood and Bone was hampered by the amount of romance that was in it, and I felt like it took away from what was an intriguing world, magic system, like, all of it. I just thought there were so many good things happening for it, but it went downhill pretty quickly for me because of all the tropey, lovey-dovey YA things that were happening in it. And I felt like the writing was a little bit juvenile. It just wasn't a book for me. But The Fifth Season, N.K. Jemisin, was phenomenal. Her writing was so compelling. Her voice as an author just spoke through the pages to me. I just felt like I just had to stop and listen. I was listening to the audiobook, but the way that she writes is just, it hits you. You just can't stop, and you can feel all the things that the characters are feeling. It was also handled a little bit more delicately. There is allegory, of course, in it. Like, that's one of her goals that she speaks about when she set out to write this book series. But it's also extremely inclusive. It's not focused on romance. It's focused on, like, the experience that these people are having, being treated like less than humans because of something that they were born with. It is hard hitting. It is a hard book to read, but it is a fantastic book. And I definitely highly recommend picking it up if you haven't already. Question number 4 is, Child Brandon was recommended several books about dogs that die. As a result, he became a reluctant reader. Please share a formative good or bad childhood reading experience. Okay, so my first experience is a good experience with reading. My elementary school was right next to the local library, and so one of the things that you did in elementary school, probably in like first grade, is you walked over to the library and were taught how to use the computers and how to find the books and the catalog system and all that. And the library in my town is the most beautiful library I've ever been to. And so when I went there, first of all, it looks like a church or a castle. It has stained glass windows. And when I went there, I was like, this is the most magical place I've ever been in my entire life. And so that is how I was introduced to reading. And so it was very easy for me to fall into it because I always wanted to go to that library. Like, it, even going back as an adult, equally as magical. does not seem to be any different. There's still no air conditioning. Like, it's just this gorgeous building. And if you look at it, I think I'm gonna put pictures in so you guys can see it. But it looks like it used to be a church, especially from the stained glass windows. But actually, the founder of it, John Clapp, when he died, he left $40,000, I believe. This is back in the day, so that was a ton of money back then, to his brothers to have a library built in the town, because he didn't have enough access to reading materials when he was a kid, and he wanted to provide that for the town. And so they went about building this library specifically for him. And so they added these beautiful stained glass, and they created this like beautiful building, and it's the Clapp Memorial Library, and it's always been a library, and it's still a library to this day. So yeah, great experience. Worst experience, probably, honestly, the only book that I was forced to read as a kid, well, in high school, The Great Expectations, was really hard for me to read at 15 in 9th grade, and I remember being like, what the hell? I love reading. Why do I hate this book so much? And also Bridge to Terabithia, which I do like as a book. I remember liking it, but I also remember being like, I thought this is a fantasy. Where's the fantasy? Are we ever going to Terabithia? Like, I just remember that being a thing in my mind. Okay, question number 5 is Brandon and several friends host the Writing Excuses podcast, and they frequently invite guests. Please tell us about a collaborative fiction project and what you thought of it. So at first I was struggling to figure out a few books that I'd read that weren't like the popular ones. Like, I've read The Illuminae Files. I've also read Sleeping Beauties by Stephen and Owen King, which I did enjoy. Not my favorite book, but I find myself like thinking about it sometimes, and the concept itself was really interesting. But the one I'm actually going to talk about is the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey, which is actually a pen name for 2 different authors, so it is a collaborative. And for me, personally, I think this series, granted I haven't finished it, it's pretty large. They're right up here. See if I can pull one out without... God, Jesus. They're really big books. This one is, I don't know, 560 pages, but I think there's like 10 of these, so I haven't read all of them. I've only read the first 2, but these are sci-fi, space opera, lots of politics, lots of really intelligent things that are happening. Like, one of the things that I think is really cool about this is like the characters that are from the asteroid belt, that grow up in the asteroid belt with low G, like lower gravity, grow really tall and thin, and so if they go to Earth, like, the gravity there is so oppressive, it's like painful. And so I thought that was a really smart choice on their part, and the writing in these is really good, and I love political intrigue, and this book has it, so those are really good. Next, the next question number 6, Brandon's first book, White Sand Prime, was rewritten and eventually converted into a graphic novel called White Sands. What book would you like to see in another format? I've actually just recently read White Sands, so pretty excited about this question because I can envision it. But okay, so this one I had to think about quite a bit, and so what I ended up deciding is, I don't know if you guys have watched it. I've only seen like the memes about it, but the Harry Potter musical.
Dumbledore? What an old coot! He's nothing like Rumbleroar, the headmaster at Pigfarts. He's a lion who can talk. Now you're just being cute. I can't go to Pigfarts. It's on Mars. You need a rocket ship.
I was thinking like the Stormlight Archives, but like a parody musical. So like Kaladin's always like off in the corner, like huddled up and like crying, and Syl's like patting him and bringing him little things. And then like Shalon's walking around with like her sketch pad and like a jar of jam. I don't know. And Yasna can just be herself, and she can just walk around and like roast people like she does, because that would be perfect. Adolin can come in and out in like a different outfit in every scene, just constantly different clothing. Rock could just literally be a rock and someone talks off screen for him. Like, I just think it could work so well. I don't know. I would watch that. Okay, number 7. Brandon writes very quickly. What prolific author or authors would you recommend? Obviously Tolkien. Obviously. And then also I really love Jane Austen. I haven't read everything by her, but I've read 3 of her books. One of my favorite books growing up was Pride and Prejudice. My grandma had these beautiful copies of classic novels. They were abridged versions, but Pride and Prejudice is one that I read over and over and over again. I probably read it, I don't know, 10 times by the time I was graduated high school. I just loved it so much. And then also, I love George R.R. Martin. I don't talk about him a lot on this channel because I haven't read Song of Ice and Fire. Well, I think I read it the first couple books last year, but I haven't read it all the way through, and I didn't have a booktube channel when I read it, so I just didn't talk about it. But it's one of my favorite series ever. I think his writing is fantastic. His character work is just... it's so good. And I've also read some of his other like smaller books. Like he has like a children's book. It's more like middle grade, called The Ice Dragon, and then he has a series of novellas called A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms that is like a prequel sort of, that is super fun. Like George R.R. Martin fun, not like Brandon Sanderson fun. But like they are good. So those are the ones I would say. Question number 8. Brandon's Cosmo Universe books are grounded in Platonic philosophy. What book or series gets you really excited about the source material? Okay, well, I'm going to talk about Song of Ice and Fire again because I was obsessed with these books for years. I would read them over. I literally read them over the entire series every time a new season came out from season 4 on, basically. I didn't, maybe last year I didn't, but I was constantly rereading them before a new season would come out, so I was basically reading 5,000 page books once a year. But I would watch interviews and like Comic-Cons, and George R.R. Martin did a panel at an Edinburgh book festival, and he discusses his influences for the series, and a lot of it is from history. So like the War of the Roses and Boudica from Scottish lore, and then like the Wall in Scotland. There was like numerous like medieval like European things that he drew inspiration from, and I've always been drawn to medieval Europe. I feel like that's pretty common for people who loved fantasy growing up, and that's one of the reasons I do love Game of Thrones, is because it has this very traditional fantasy feel, but with more magical, different elements than other more traditional fantasy books have. And there's also a lot more women in it, which I know some people think that he doesn't handle women well, but I personally feel like the women in his books are very powerful. Like there's so many POV characters that are women, and a lot of them outsmart the men all the time. Like, of course there's bad things that happen to a lot of them. I need to stop talking about this book. Eventually I'll make videos about these because I'm going to reread them at some point, and obviously I'm going to talk about them because they're my favorite. So anyway, moving on. Okay, question number 9. Brandon loves to show multiple sides of every issue and to contrast character values. Please share a book that handles controversy well. Okay, so this is kind of a random one, and I haven't read it in a while, but a book that I think handles controversy well is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. I don't know how to say her last name. It's not Win. I think it might be Ng or Ung. But I'll put it on the screen, obviously. But I really loved this book when I read it. I don't read a lot of literary fiction, but I try to reach for ones, especially ones that are being talked about a lot. I think I read this like two years ago. But the controversy, this book seems like it would be a little bit more shallow than it is, but there's so many moral things that are handled in it, that are tackled so well. I remember picking it up. I read it in probably like 2 days because you can see both sides of the issues throughout the whole thing. Like you understand where both sides are coming from. You understand why people aren't getting along and how all of the little fires start everywhere that eventually burn the house down. So, and that's not a spoiler. That's how the book starts. So that's my answer for that. I'm sorry it's not more in depth. I struggled with this question a little bit because my brain sometimes makes me overthink how to answer something, and then it just like fizzles out and doesn't work. So question number 10. Brandon Sanderson is a writing teacher, and unlike some writing teachers, he posts his lectures online for free. What free literature resource are you grateful for? So mostly I use the Overdrive app from my library, BookTube and Bookstagram, although BookTube is a little bit more informative and Bookstagram is more like the aesthetic, and looking at the beautiful photos that people take and stuff like that. And you get a lot of discussion on there as well, but it takes a little time to start to get to know people on there, whereas on BookTube you actually get to sit down with somebody you don't know and listen to them talk about their favorite books. So it is definitely more personal on here. I think you get more of who somebody is as opposed to who somebody is portraying on social media. I've also used NetGalley and Edelweiss occasionally. I don't read a lot of ARCs though. I'm pretty particular. And if you're feeling crazy, you could hit up a couple fan fiction websites. I'm just saying, you can read some crazy stuff on there for free. And there's some pretty good authors, just saying. There's some pretty great fan fiction authors. Not that I'm reading them anytime soon, I used to. Looking at you, Harry Potter fan fiction. Bex Chan, Isolation. You guys know what I'm talking about? You ever been down that road? The black hole of fan fiction where you want to read books but all you can read is fan fiction for Harry Potter? Well, it's dark times, okay? I'm not proud. But it's where I came from, and it's the journey before the destination, I guess. So, alright you guys, well I'm going to get out of here. If you want to do this video, absolutely do it. Let me know if you do, if you have done it, so I can go check your video out as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you'd be so kind. Ring that bell if you would like to see more videos from me. I feel like I've been pretty consistent lately, so that's a plus. So either way, see you guys next time. Stay tuned, and there'll be more to come.